Gormagat Kirlacht and good evening. I suppose, just to follow on, I suppose, the fact that the National Disability Inclusion Strategy was extended for 1 year, and then when it was seen that a new strategy wasn't ready to go at the beginning of this year, it just beggars belief why it wasn't extended for another year. But will the new strategy be in place by the end of this year? Because I know, Rennie, you say in your opening remarks there that there's very slow progress on consultation, and I mean, you're saying it's more about how the strategy should be implemented or put together rather than consulting on its content. So, I mean, will we have a strategy either at the end of this year, or is there a date given for when it is? And it's like we're operating in a vacuum then, because there's no strategy. I think you both made reference to the different departments, the DCCs, and that they're not meeting. Why are they not meeting? I mean, if the actions under the initial disability inclusion strategy that was due to end of 2021 haven't all been met, they haven't all been, why is work not ongoing to ensure that all of those actions are addressed, or are partially addressed, or being addressed in some way or other? I mean, it's just. I mean, you're saying the monitoring meetings as well have been discontinued. So it's like everything's come to a standstill. And so there's a vacuum, so there's nothing happening in that vacuum. And I know you both make reference as well to the GCCs working and the different departments. I think you said, Aideen, that there are 10 and they meet separately. Or do they all meet separately, the 10 departments? Do they all meet separately, or is there's kind of no overarching, body or because you're saying like a minister and somebody from the department will attend, and they meet quarterly. But are there actually 10 different?
Do you mean the steering group for the National Disability Inclusion Strategy?
No, the different departments, the DCCs.
Oh, the DCC. So, yeah. Every department is required to have a Disability Consultative Committee, and they would have met quarterly. And the NDA would have attended those meetings along with members of the DSG. For the most part, they did fall into abeyance when the strategy expired. There are a couple of departments that have disability forums or groups, and they've continued to meet, but I suppose what they're discussing more generally, the disability dimension of the services that the department would offer. They're not necessarily tying that to actions that were committed under the NDIS, so that there is a gap there. I mean, we welcome the fact that some departments have dedicated groups to look at this area, and I think it is a good step towards inclusion, but no, they're not meeting, and the steering group for the NDIS isn't meeting. I'm not an apologist for the department at all in any way, but I think the officials perhaps felt that the groups and the personalities on the groups would be meeting very regularly anyway in order to develop the new UNCRPD implementation strategy as part of that process. And so there was a feeling that we've moved to that track rather than continuing on the steering group meetings. But we do absolutely acknowledge that it leaves a gap. And in terms of a timeline, I know there was a hope that the strategy would be ready by the end of this year, and I think recent consultation events mean that more time will need to be taken. I think there is still an intention and a hope to have it as early as possible in 2024. And I suppose we in the NDA would feel there's a delicate balancing act here. We know more than anyone else would very much like to see a strategy developed and published and monitoring structures in place. But if that strategy is seen as being developed in a tokenistic or a tick box way, it won't have the buy-in of anyone, and so it won't be starting from a good place, and it won't be starting from a position of being as aligned with the convention as it could be. So we do feel that it is probably worth taking that little bit extra time to get it right from the start, and the challenge is how to do that without losing further momentum.
I know, because you're saying like some departments apparently are working better than others. So I mean, can you give an example of any departments that are working really well, or is that not a no-go area?
If I may firstly say that what Aideen said is very consistent with the view of the DSG, and I'm happy to endorse the points she made in that regard. Insofar as naming and shaming is concerned, no, I with all respect, I think this is not the place to do that, although the final review of the assessment, or the NDA's independent assessment of implementation of the disability strategy makes for interesting and identifiable reading, if I may be so diplomatic.
Just if I may, Chair.
Information we need to.
Like,
Polly.
I know the NDA, you've been requested by the department to carry out an independent evaluation of the DPCN. So when is that review due? And
we hope that review would be due shortly. We have a draft report, and we're just clarifying a few of the recommendations within that with the department, and then we hope we would be in a position to share it with the network themselves, who contributed to the review, and thereafter would be cleared for publication. So I hope by the end of this year.
Oh yeah, definitely.
would you feel, like everybody, would you feel like DPOs are being consulted with and disabled people regularly, you know, because we hear it from different DPOs in here who feel that they're not, that sometimes it's a box ticking exercise what the consultation is done just to say we've done it, but then their recommendations are not taken on board by different organisations and departments. Others feel then that maybe the wrong bodies are being consulted with, in that it according to the UNCRPD it should be DPOs or disabled people themselves and not service providers, for example. So, you know, will that all be addressed as a part of your review, or, you know, do you feel there's more to be done there? Or how best, I suppose, to identify exactly, because there's a lot of different DPOs, and I reckon that you know, they some of them are quite small, some of them are larger, you know, so it's kind of as well, like some have suggested a register, the department don't think a register is a good idea, so I'm just wondering, you know, what do you think of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, some of that ground will be covered in the review, and I suppose we would have said before in this committee that the DPO landscape is evolving in Ireland, and it is at a younger stage than it is in some other states. In terms of identifying, you know, providing a mechanism for identifying DPOs, and so being able to direct departments towards them, I think that's probably a practical suggestion. And we do have some guidance ourselves in our participation matters guidelines as to how public bodies could effectively consult and engage. I think it's worth stating that while the convention gives clear space to and recognition of DPOs in the consultation space and in the monitoring space, it doesn't preclude other stakeholders being involved, and we would certainly feel that all parties would have valuable perspectives to bring, and our guidance is that DPOs should be consulted with. They should be consulted with as a priority, and where feasible and practical, their input should be taken on board and addressed, or if it is not feasible, that they should be given reasons and an explanation as to why not. But very definitely, family members, service providers, individuals who do not wish to be part of a DPO, all of those people have very valuable perspectives, and it's about creating, I suppose, space and mechanisms for these voices to be heard.
Yeah, and I would just add that because those spaces and mechanisms are not fully worked out, it's maybe one of the reasons why the strategy isn't moving along as fast as it might, because there's a little bit of, I suppose, not disagreement, but just it's not, the processes of how this is going to work in terms of the consultations is not fully worked out. So that has to be worked out fully first before you move into what you would consider a normal consultation process, getting into the, you know, the nitty-gritty and what are the actions or whatever going to be. So yeah, I think it's a very important point, and we hope the DPCN review will help the department to make some decisions around that, but because you've other, like the DSG that exists, which wasn't part of the DPCN review, everything has to fit together without any conflicts or that arising. So it is an area still to be explored.
If I may add, I think, as both Aideen and Ross have said, the shape of how the consultation goes is taking time, but it might actually be valuable time, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have an active strategy going, because getting the model of the consultation process sufficiently acceptable. I'm just going to say on a personal basis, I don't see everybody being totally pleased with any outcome, but in the broad brush, meeting the objectives of the convention without exclusionary activity, and finding, I mentioned earlier that, if the disability community is 21% of the population now and probably larger when the next census is published, that itself is very large, but it also means you're dealing with a very large group of people whose diverse views represent the natural diversity of individuals and communities and so on. So it's not, I'm not afraid to criticise people, but it isn't an easy thing. I've been observing many of the meetings that have been going on, and they kind of go down into the dark hole of, are we the right people in the right place talking about the right thing right now? And I guess it's one of those processes that is embryonic, as Aideen has said. We haven't really kind of matured to that extent. But on the positive side, every one of these meetings builds capacity within the DPOs, because if you have a small group of people who previously haven't been advocates or activists, just engaging in a meeting and seeing what the standard operating procedures are and how you construct your arguments and how you get allies for your arguments and so on, that in its own way is, I won't call it an accidental outcome, but it's a beneficial outcome, I think, because capacity is being built. And then reasonable accommodation, because if you have, as I have seen, people who need more time, perhaps because of a particular condition, to articulate a position, then instead of somebody speaking and talking for 2 minutes, it might be necessary to wait 5 minutes to hear their valuable contribution, because they've just a slower processing or a slower methodology. And that could include things like intellectual disability, so that we can, if the broad church of what the convention is aiming for is as inclusive as it says, and if we as Ireland are trying to meet that, then there are readjustments not only for the community of disabled people and their various groupings in which they form, but also for the groups like ourselves and yourselves to come forward with that accommodation and that space and allow people truly to be heard. But it is a journey that we're very early steps on. They're, by the way, my personal opinions as well as others, but I think I wanted to offer them. Thank you.
Thank you.